Today we'll explore one of the darkest and most disturbing topics in existence: working at night. Get ready to hear 7 stories of people who worked night shifts and ended up embroiled in disturbing mysteries, disappearances, and situations that defy all logic. These stories are true or based on frightening accounts, where the darkness of the early morning reveals secrets that should remain hidden. So settle in, keep the lights on, or not, and let's begin this journey. Oh, and before night falls, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave a like. This will really help me continue bringing you this kind of content. 1. The Factory Watchman. In January 2017, a man named Thomas Keller was hired to work as a night watchman at a former plastics factory in the small town of Hathersage, in the English countryside. The facility had been decommissioned for more than 5 years, but the owner, a German multinational, still maintained some equipment and inventory on site. For legal and insurance reasons, the warehouse required constant surveillance. Thomas, then 42, divorced and childless, accepted the job without hesitation. He was a loner, discreet, and accustomed to long shifts. The shift lasted from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He received a magnetic badge to access the main gate and was required to register his presence every hour through a digital panel in the administrative office. There was also a closed-circuit system with 12 cameras, all accessed by an archaic system that recorded in real time, but without audio. The place was enormous: 3 warehouses, an abandoned cafeteria, empty offices, and corridors that echoed every sound. For the first week, everything went well. Thomas made his rounds with a powerful flashlight, listened to podcasts or read on his phone, and clocked in at the correct times. But starting in the second week, he began to notice a strange detail. Every time at 3:27 a.m., a motion light would activate in the second warehouse, where, according to the company's maps, there were no windows or sensors activated. Intrigued, he decided to investigate. The next night, he arrived early, checked the sensors, and confirmed that the area should be completely deactivated. Even so, at 3:27 a.m., the light flickered again. When he arrived at the warehouse, the bulb was off. Thomas considered some installation error or interference, but found nothing. In the following days, the phenomenon repeated itself. And along with it, an even more disturbing detail emerged. The registration system showed, every day at this time, an inactive badge being used to unlock the back door. The badge belonged to Philip Durnley, a former company employee who had died in 2011, the victim of an accident inside the factory. A shocked Thomas took the information to his regional supervisor, who downplayed the situation, saying it must have been a bug in the old system. Despite feeling uncomfortable, Thomas decided to stay on the job. He needed the money and didn't want to appear impressionable. By the third week, tensions had increased. During his rounds, he found a fresh footprint on the dusty cafeteria floor. Just one. The kind of print left by heavy industrial boots. He took a picture but didn't show it to anyone.
No cámaras.
The next day, there were 2 footprints. Then 4. Always in the same spot. It was as if someone was returning to the same spot every night. Thomas began sleeping during the day with his phone on silent and barely ate. He began writing down everything in a notebook: light-out times, footprints, badge numbers, system glitches. And he began to notice something even worse. The men's locker room door, which he left locked every night, appeared unlocked the next morning. He considered supervisory tests, but no one responded to his emails. He tried contacting the day shift security guard. He had resigned 2 weeks earlier but wasn't listed as a replacement. In the 4th week, he decided to install a hidden camera in the locker room, using his own cell phone. He hid it behind a trash can. The next morning, he checked the recordings. Something entered the room at 3:28 a.m. It was a tall silhouette, dressed in old industrial clothing, with a heavy, almost shuffling gait. The figure stopped in front of one of the lockers, opened it, remained there for 10 minutes, and then left. The face was not visible, but the gait matched that described in reports of Philip Durnley's accident. Thomas took the video to the local police station. The police didn't take it very seriously, but they did file a report. When he returned to the factory to collect his belongings and resign, the supervisor was no longer there. The company's email had been deactivated. The German headquarters claimed to have no active security contracts in the region. And most frighteningly, the factory had been officially closed since 2015. Confused and aimless, Thomas moved in with a cousin in Sheffield while he looked for another job. But he couldn't sleep. He had constant nightmares about dark hallways, alarms flashing at 3:27 a.m., and the echoing sound of heavy footsteps approaching. One night, he recorded himself sleeping. Reviewing the audio, he heard the door opening and loud breathing near the microphone. There was no sign of a break-in. None of the neighbors saw anything. Thomas Keller disappeared 2 weeks later. His house was intact, with no signs of forced entry. His car was found parked next to the old factory, with the driver's door open and his notebook on the passenger seat. The last page simply read, 327. He's back. On the factory's digital panel, which had been without power for months, the display was blinking. Witnesses swear they saw the screen light up for a few seconds that morning and register an input. Time, 3:27 a.m. User, Dernley_P. 2. Midnight shift cashier. In 2021, 26-year-old Laura Demers landed her first steady job in a small town in the Canadian countryside called Smithers, British Columbia. She was hired as a night cashier at a 24-hour gas station, the only one in that region of woods and deserted roads. The place was isolated, with no neighbors nearby, surrounded by forests and mountains. Customer traffic was usually low, with peak activity only on weekends. The convenience store attached to the gas station was simple, with a security camera, an intercom for outside calls, and a panic button under the counter. Laura always worked alone, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Despite the quiet and sometimes eerie environment, she felt safe with the automatic doors locked at night and the armored booth where the cashier was located. For the first week, everything went as expected. Some drivers stopped for gas, bought soda or cigarettes, chatted briefly, and continued on their way. But starting in the second week, Laura noticed something strange. The same old model black car started showing up every night, always between 2:50 and 3:10 a.m. It never refueled. The car simply parked in a secluded spot, with the engine running. Someone remained inside, never getting out. At first, Laura thought it might be an indecisive customer, or maybe a truck driver taking a nap. But the precise timing began to bother her. Every night. Same minute. Same car. Never got out. Never waved. Never called the store. It just sat there, with its headlights off and the interior too dark to see who was driving. On the third consecutive night of the apparition, she decided to call the manager the next morning and report the incident. He suggested it might be a local resident, perhaps a former employee, and that there wasn't much they could do if the person wasn't committing a crime. Laura asked to review the recordings. Upon checking the system, they noticed that the videos between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m. were corrupted for the last 3 nights. Only during that period. No other time was there any error. From then on, the anxiety grew. On her next shift, Laura decided to record the parking lot with her own cell phone, hidden among the products on the shelves. She left the device facing the window, with night mode activated. When 2:48 a.m. struck, she was already seated waiting. The black car appeared at 2:52 a.m. same spot. Same space. But this time, the store lights flashed for 3 seconds, and the automatic door made a strange noise, as if trying to open without a command. Frightened, Laura pressed the panic button. Nothing happened. No alarm, no response. The system didn't alert the dispatcher. She picked up her phone and saw that the video had frozen. The recording had stopped at exactly 2:52 a.m. When she looked outside, the car was gone. The next night, she asked to switch shifts. The manager refused, saying he needed reliable staff on the night shift. Laura insisted, mentioning the recording problem and the strange car. The manager brushed it off. He said the store was experiencing electrical instability, and that the car probably belonged to someone local who didn't want to be disturbed. 2 nights later, the car returned. But this time, it turned off the engine. Laura felt her heart race. She waited for minutes in absolute silence. And then, for the first time, the car door opened. A man got out. Tall, thin, wearing a long hooded coat. He walked slowly to the store window, keeping his head down. He stopped 2 meters from the glass. He stood there, without moving, for 7 minutes. Laura called the police. No one answered. The phone only had a deadline. When she picked it up, it rebooted itself. She started recording the man with the camera, but the screen froze. Nothing worked. In the window, the man simply pressed his hand against the glass and remained there, as if waiting for her to approach. Suddenly, he returned to the car. He got in and drove off. The next morning, Laura quit. She said she wouldn't return to that shift. The manager simply signed the papers without asking why. When she walked into the monitoring room, she saw the list of recordings from the previous night. No footage saved between 2:45 and 3:15. Again. The next day, a new cashier took over. It was a young man named Ray, 22 years old. He disappeared the second night. The last recorded image was of him serving a customer around 2:40 a.m. After that, nothing more. No sign of him leaving, no sign of him leaving the premises. His car was found parked, keys in the ignition, and the store completely locked from the inside. The franchise cited a miscommunication and hired another replacement within 3 days. On a website specializing in disappearances in British Columbia, Ray's name is listed alongside 2 other former employees of the same station who also disappeared in the previous decade under similar circumstances. Always on Tuesdays, between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m. Laura never worked nights again. She moved to Toronto, changed her last name, and deleted all her social media accounts. In an anonymous interview with a local station, she simply said, "I didn't see his face. But he saw me. And he came back the next day." Since then, none of the new cashiers has lasted more than 3 weeks on the midnight shift. 3. Caretaker of the psychiatric hospital. In late 2015, a 39-year-old man named Marcus Schneider took a night job as a janitor at Szeged State Hospital in Hungary. The centuries-old institution was located in a remote area of the city, surrounded by forests. Part of the hospital still operated with patients undergoing treatment, but an entire wing had been closed since 1998, following a scandal involving unexplained inmate deaths. Marcus had been a janitor at a school but had been unemployed for months. The new job paid well, and all he had to do was patrol the hallways, keep the generators running, and ensure no intruders broke into the hospital at night. He didn't have access to the wards with active patients. His job was solely to monitor the abandoned areas. Marcus was a quiet man of few words, with a history of mild depression and no close family. He accepted the job believing it would be a way to start over. On his first night, Marcus was struck by the sheer size of the place. The old hallways, with cracked tiles and graffiti, were reminiscent of a sanatorium in a horror movie. Locked doors, stacked old stretchers, and a musty smell permeated the room. Yet, everything seemed in order. He made his rounds, recorded his check-in times, and remained in the makeshift office until the end of his shift. But over the next few nights, the feeling of being watched began to bother him. Security cameras lined some sections of the hallways, but many were broken. On the 3rd night, while he was watching the monitors, one of them, the one in Ward 3, completely isolated, flashed for 3 seconds, revealing an open door. Marcus knew he had locked them all. He went there, reluctantly. Upon arriving, he found the door ajar. A light wind blew through the hallway. Inside, everything seemed in order, except for one detail. One of the beds had been dragged to the center of the room. And next to it, a small, old-fashioned voice recorder was playing. He pressed stop. The tape was no longer working. Marcus reported the incident on the shift report, but no one said anything the next day. As the weeks passed, the events intensified. Chairs were moved. Drawers appeared open. Curtains were ripped down. Marcus began leaving his flashlight on at all times and began carrying pepper spray. One day, he found small bare footprints leading from Wing 2 to the archives room. But there was no sign of a break-in. And the cameras continued to fail, always between 2 and 3 a.m. In those early mornings, Marcus began to feel time slowing down. The clock seemed to freeze, and the night sounds grew more intense. He heard cracking sounds coming from the ceiling, doors creaking on their own, and a low, constant buzzing, like a barely audible whistle that made his ears vibrate. He took 2 caffeine pills a night, but even awake, he felt as if he were in a trance. The lights flickered as he approached the abandoned wards, and one night he even found a wheelchair facing the wall, with the phrase "he's facing away because he's seen too much" written on the back. In the 8th week, while on patrol, he heard the sound of metal scraping against ceramic tiles coming from the 2nd floor. He cautiously went upstairs. The sound stopped. When he entered an empty room, he found the wall scratched with the words, "We are still here," written with some sharp object. Marcus refused to erase it. He simply closed the door and went downstairs. He informed management, but again, he received silence. The next day, he decided to look for information about Ward 3. He learned from a former nurse that the ward had been sealed off after a patient escaped containment and killed 2 other inmates. There were rumors that more patients had disappeared without explanation, but the records had been sealed by the government. No one wanted to work in that part of the hospital. The following week, Marcus began to feel his routine was being monitored. A note appeared in his locker, "You are not alone on shift." The handwriting was irregular, as if written by a child. He took the note to the administration, who said it was a sick joke by a patient. Marcus knew no one had access to that ward. In the 12th week, while checking the archives, he found old patient photos, printed on brown paper, scattered on the floor. In every image, there was a figure in the background, a man in a lab coat, but with his face covered by a white cloth. Alves Sesame. In every photo. None of the records had a name. He took the photos home. That night, he had intense nightmares. He dreamed of endless corridors, where the lights went out one by one. At the end of the corridor, the man in the lab coat was always there, standing still. Motionless. Just watching. The next day, the photos were missing from his drawer. He asked his roommate, but the man said he hadn't touched anything. Marcus began to suspect he was being followed outside the hospital as well. He tried to request leave. He claimed exhaustion and a lack of security. The hospital refused. They said he was acting paranoid. He decided to record his own shift with a voice recorder attached to his pocket. In the recordings, his footsteps could be heard, and other footsteps, always 2 seconds later, as if someone were imitating him. At one point, a low, almost whispered voice says, "There's no point in running away." In the early hours of May 4, 2016, Marcus didn't show up at home. His car was parked in the hospital courtyard. The last camera recorded him entering Ward 3 at 2:17 a.m. The following image shows the door closing. He was never seen again. 3 weeks later, a new janitor was hired. She quit on the second night after finding the phrase, "We're still here" written again, this time in dried blood on the wall. The following week, the hospital declared Ward 3 permanently closed and removed the surveillance records. Marcus's disappearance was never officially investigated. But every new employee who takes the night shift receives an informal message from their senior colleagues. If you hear footsteps that aren't yours, don't look back. Never look back. Hey guys, is it tense there too, or is it just me looking at the corners of the room? These stories about people who work the night shift are really scary, aren't they? If you enjoy this type of realistic story with suspense, mystery, and that chill down your spine, take advantage now and take a quick break, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It's quick and really motivates me to continue bringing you this hair-raising content. 4. Call the taxi center. In 2018, Jean-Marc Morel, 32, worked as a night operator at a taxi station in the small town of Millau, in southern France. It was a town surrounded by valleys and forests, with a calm atmosphere and a slow pace, where everyone knew everyone else. The night shift was considered the most relaxed, few trips, experienced drivers, and the hours were often spent with Jean listening to music or reading books while waiting for a call. The company operated with a digital system and a radio system, an older model still used by some drivers due to signal issues in remote areas. Jean was responsible for monitoring both and distributing rides based on the car's locations. But one October night, something strange happened. The radio crackled, and a faint, barely audible voice emerged between the frequencies. "Hello. I need a taxi. Near Beaunois Road, please." Jean checked the system. No calls had been recorded. The voice was female, trembling, as if panicked. He tried to answer, but there was no response. He thought it might be interference, but he logged the incident in the internal log. Beaunois was a forested region with no permanent residents, known for being the scene of a brutal crime in 1999, where 4 young people were murdered at a campsite. The case was never solved. The next night, another call. Same time, same voice. "Can you hear me? I'm on the road, there's blood. They're coming." Jean froze. He grabbed his cell phone and recorded the audio. The voice sounded even more desperate. No identification in the system. No GPS. He decided not to assign the ride to any driver, but he didn't mention it to his supervisors. 2 days later, a new driver, Louis Bertrand, asked for a ride in the countryside. Jean, against his instincts, mentioned Beaunois. Louis, without hesitation, accepted. 15 minutes later, his signal disappeared. No radio, no GPS. They thought it was a signal failure, but he never returned. His car was found 3 days later, in a ravine, with the driver's door open and the engine still warm. No signs of a struggle. No tracks. No Louis. The police were called, but found no clues. The case was closed as a disappearance in a dangerous zone. Jean became obsessed with the calls. He installed a recorder connected directly to the radio's frequency. Within 3 weeks, he recorded 4 similar calls, each between 2 and 3 a.m. Each time, the voices were different, but all with the same pattern, faint, frightened, coming from the Beaunois Road. He took the audio to a friend who worked in sound editing. While analyzing the sound waves, his friend noticed something strange. The sounds had a background of inverted frequencies, as if they were being played backward. It didn't sound like a normal broadcast. It was as if the requests were being reproduced from old recordings. There was excessive hissing, overlapping voices in the background, and a constant sound of heavy breathing in the background. Jean began investigating the company's old records. He discovered that between 2005 and 2014, 3 drivers had disappeared in the same area, all on the night shift. The incidents weren't officially linked, but the dates matched similar reports: incomplete calls, distorted voices, and signal loss. He also found reports filed by an older operator, Michel, who had reported unsourced requests on the radio and tried to investigate, but was transferred to another department weeks later. Jean sought out Michel. The man, now retired, greeted him reluctantly. He said he still received calls from blocked numbers, with voices whispering excerpts of the calls. He showed notebooks with notes, dates, driver names, and a map with markings in the Bois Noir region.
In a low voice, Michelle said, "They don't order taxis.
They want you to get in." One night, Jean decided to test it out. He took one of the fleet's taxis, an older model with an analog radio, and drove to Bois Noir. He had a hidden camera on the dashboard and activated microphones. Upon arrival, the radio crackled. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a voice emerged.
"Jean, you shouldn't have come." He braked. The voice called his name. The car shut off. Lights off. Radio mute.
Jean got out and walked down the road. In the darkness, he heard footsteps.
And then whispers. A group? Different voices, all faint.
When he returned to the car, the keys were no longer in the ignition.
The door was locked.
He ran for over an hour to a main road. His cell phone had 78% battery when he got in the car. It was dead when he got out. The next morning, he told his manager what had happened. He was suspended for using the car without authorization. He decided to resign. Before leaving, he deleted the digital recordings he had stored and made copies of the audio and camera recordings. When reviewing the videos, he noticed something he hadn't noticed at the time. 3 silhouettes were standing among the trees, watching the car, completely still, even as it sped away. On a driver's forum, Jean posted some of the audio and described the experience. The post was removed after 24 hours. One user commented, "Bois Noir doesn't call. It chooses. If they called you, don't come back." 3 months later, Jean moved to Marseille and never returned to working in taxis. The recordings were anonymously handed over to a local crime investigation channel, but were never aired. The show's editor, who saw the files, requested a transfer weeks later and declined to comment on the content. To this day, taxi drivers in the area avoid that road. But every now and then, a voice comes over the radio. And just when a driver agrees, another car is found empty. And driverless. The company never confirmed the disappearances. But in 2021, it switched to a new, 100% digital system. It also permanently deactivated its nighttime radio frequency. A decision that, according to a former employee, was not for modernization, but for protection.
5. The night cook at the 24-hour diner.
Edgar Myers, 28, took the night shift at a small 24-hour diner called Route 16 Diner, located in rural Idaho.
The diner was a classic American diner. Checkerboard floor, red stools, flickering neon lights, and a broken jukebox leaning in the corner.
Tucked into a lonely stretch of Route 16, it was a stopping point for truckers, solo travelers, and the occasional insomniac. Edgar had recently moved to the area, looking to start over after a turbulent time with his previous job in Minneapolis. Within the first week, Edgar noticed a pattern. Around 3:20 a.m., a man would walk in. Always the same, tall, thin, wearing a worn brown overcoat and a hat. His face, partially obscured by the shadow of the cap, displayed a thin chin and very pale lips. He never took his eyes off Edgar, even while eating. And he always ordered the same thing, a double burger, unsalted fries, and a cherry soda. Edgar thought it was strange, but didn't mention it to his colleagues. There was nothing objectively wrong. The man paid in exact cash, with clean bills, folded in the same way. He ate slowly, looking straight ahead. He didn't say anything beyond what he ordered. He finished, got up, and left without a trace. He didn't leave any dirty cutlery.
The plate, though used, seemed untouched.
In the 3rd week, Edgar decided to tell Gloria, the server who worked with him. She said the man had been coming there for years, but never when another cook was on shift.
Only at night.
Only when a newbie was on shift.
No one knew his name. No credit card. No records.
Gloria said she even asked other customers about him, but no one seemed to notice. Edgar began to observe him. He noticed that as he approached the door, the sign's light flickered. Always. The doorbell would flicker when he entered, but would ring normally for anyone else. One day, he tried to make conversation.
"Good evening. Call today, who?"
The man just stared for 3 seconds, then replied, "You shouldn't be here."
And then he smiled.
A cold smile, expressionless in his eyes. Edgar felt a chill run down his spine. After that episode, he began having trouble sleeping during the day. He dreamed of the empty kitchen, of wet footprints appearing out of nowhere on the floor. Once, he woke up with his work clothes folded beside his bed, even though he swore he'd left them in the laundry room. In the 4th week, the routine was broken. The man arrived at the same time, but this time he asked, "The usual, and bring the envelope." Edgar froze. What envelope?
The man smiled again. He held out his hand.
Unsure why, Edgar felt compelled to check under the counter. There was, indeed, a brown envelope. Inside, an old photo. It showed Edgar younger, around 15, sleeping in his old room in Minneapolis.
It was night. The blinds were half open.
And through the crack, outside the window, a silhouette could be seen watching. Edgar's heart raced. He'd never seen that photo before. There was no way anyone could have taken it. The window was on the second floor. And he lived alone with his mother at the time. He looked at the man, who simply said, "There are things you have forgotten."
But I haven't.
The rest of the shift passed in silence. When the manager arrived in the morning, Edgar explained what had happened. They searched for the envelope.
Nothing. The photo was gone too.
The security cameras hadn't been recording since 3 a.m. The cables had been cut inside the wall. No other customers had shown up that night. In the following days, Edgar tried to find some explanation. He combed through old files, social media, and police reports. He discovered that in 2006, a teenager named Thomas Ellman disappeared in Minneapolis. He was 15 years old. The photo released at the time bore a strong resemblance to Edgar. The features, the haircut, the facial structure. As if they were twins, or the same person. Intrigued, Edgar returned to his old neighborhood. He found the house where he lived.
It was abandoned.
He entered through the back door. In the room where he usually slept, he found a small hole in the wall, hidden by old wallpaper. Inside, a box with objects he didn't recognize, a notebook with notes in childish handwriting, a set of rusty keys, and another photo. In the new image, he was seen cooking in the diner.
The same night. The same outfit.
But with one detail, the man in the trench coat was behind him, inside the kitchen, watching him. Edgar destroyed the photo.
He threw away the box.
He tried to forget about it. He requested a transfer to the afternoon shift. For a while, it worked. But 2 months later, the cook on the new night shift quit. She said she was being watched. She found a photo in his drawer.
A boy sleeping.
It looked like Edgar, years younger.
The restaurant is still open.
But every now and then, when a new cook takes over the late night shift, the man returns. And orders the same thing. And what comes next depends on the memory of whoever's there. Some things can't be forgotten. And some people never stop watching.
6. Night delivery man.
In the industrial city of Wolfsburg, Germany, a former mechanical components factory operated 24 hours a day. The Kruger metalwork was known for its rigidity, German discipline, and history of neglected accidents. It was not uncommon to see workers with amputated fingers, hot oil burns, or chronic tendinitis. But what frightened new hires most was the requirement to work the night shift for at least a month.
The reason? No one knew.
But everyone respected it. In January 2019, 24-year-old Felix Baumgartner joined the company as an operations technician. A recent graduate in mechatronics engineering, he needed the job. He was assigned to Sector 9, a seldom-used part of the industrial plant, with 1970s-era machinery and lit by flickering fluorescent lights. During the day, the sector was virtually ignored. But at night, it always had a permanent employee.
And now, that employee was him.
The routine was simple: keep the machines running, record pressures and temperatures, and trigger alarms in case of failures. But within the first week, Felix realized that Sector 9 wasn't just old.
It was isolated.
Cell phone reception was dead. Security cameras had blind spots. Radios were unreliable. And the corridors leading there stretched for meters without a single fork. The first night, one of the machines vibrated more than usual. Checking the logs, Felix noticed that the previous night's data was gone. The sensors showed only flat lines, as if nothing had happened. He thought it was a system error.
He continued.
But in the second week, things got worse. During an inspection, he found oily footprints leading from the hallway into Sector 9. Footprints that weren't his. He wrote them down, recorded them, but no supervisor commented on the report. He began to notice small noises, metallic clicks like screws being screwed in, footsteps echoing in the pipes, and a constant hissing sound coming from the back of the boiler room. Curious, he asked the night watchman, a silent man named Otto, what was there.
Otto simply replied,
"Nothing you need to know." Felix persisted. Otto then explained that in the 1980s, there had been a secret project in that sector, a fully automated assembly line, with control based on human behavior patterns. It was a pioneering attempt to integrate emotional response into industrial processes. But the project was aborted after a fatal accident. A worker was found dead inside the main machine.
Decapitated.
With no explanation. Since then, management has kept the department active only to avoid the need to legally shut it down. An informal agreement: the department isn't shut down, but neither is it allowed to receive visitors. One technician at a time, always a newbie, always on night shift.
For 30 days. Then, transfer.
In the third week, Felix found a VHS videotape in one of the control room drawers. Curious, he took it home and watched it. The recording showed grainy images of Sector 9, dated 1993. A technician was operating the main machine. The image was shaky.
At one point, the machine stopped. The man approached. And then, all too quickly, something pulled him in. There was no sound.
Only the spinning of the rollers and the body being swallowed. The tape ended with a frozen image of the machine's display, which read, "Input accepted." Felix took the tape to management. He received no response. The next day, the control room was locked. His passwords had been changed. And his badge only allowed access to Sector 9. No other part of the factory. By the fourth week, the heat inside the sector became unbearable. The fans shut off by themselves. The steam was thick. Felix began to hear breathing coming from the pipes. One morning, he saw a shadow move between the cylinders.
He chased it. But there was no one.
Except for a note on his workbench. 3 days left. He tried to leave the area. But the door, which previously only locked from the outside, now also locked from the inside. His card no longer worked. And no supervisor answered his calls. On the final night of his shift, Felix prepared everything to document the events. He positioned his cell phone, activated continuous recording, and marked the times of each action.
Midnight passed.
At 2:14 a.m., the main machine turned on by itself. The screen was blue with no commands.
He approached. The display flashed. Input accepted. Processing. He took 2 steps back.
A grinding sound of gears rang out. The ground shook. When he turned, he saw Otto in the doorway, watching. But something was wrong. Otto was wearing the old factory uniform,
smeared with grease.
And he had a name tag with the date 1984.
Felix ran. But he stumbled.
When he stood up, the machine had stopped.
The room was empty.
His cell phone was gone. In its place, only a new note.
Full shift.
Entry accepted. He was found the next day by an intern, locked inside the unit.
He couldn't speak.
He just wrote the same words on loose sheets of paper, entry accepted, entry accepted, entry accepted. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. 2 months later, a new technician took over the night shift at Sector 9. While filling out his application, he noticed a name crossed out above his own, Felix Baumgartner.
No one explained. And he didn't ask.
But at the end of his first week, he found a piece of VHS tape in the closet.
Labeled.
Entry accepted. 7. The security camera operator. In a small industrial town in the English countryside called Barton-upon-Humber, there was Logistics Warehouse 17, owned by Redcliffe Logistics. The company had a large fleet of trucks and was responsible for distributing products throughout the country. The facility operated 24 hours a day, and nighttime security was essential. Oliver Mason, 31, worked the night shift as a security camera operator. His job was to monitor approximately 32 cameras spread throughout the vast warehouse and yard, ensuring everything remained quiet. Oliver enjoyed the job, even though the night shift was monotonous and lonely. Everything was going smoothly until, one September morning, at 4:02 a.m., Oliver noticed something strange. On monitor number 17, which covered the outdoor yard near the truck entrance, he clearly saw a motionless figure, partially hidden behind one of the parked vehicles. Finding the presence strange, as no movement was scheduled for that night, Oliver radioed to notify the outdoor security guard, Dan, who responded quickly and went to check the location. Dan returned a few minutes later, claiming he hadn't found anything. Intrigued, Oliver reviewed the footage and noticed something even more disturbing. As Dan checked the scene, the figure remained visible on camera, motionless, in exactly the same position. As if Dan couldn't see it. Over the next few nights, the figure continued to appear punctually between 4 o'clock and 4:05 a.m., always behind a truck, always motionless. Oliver began to notice that, despite being clearly visible on the monitor, no security guard could identify it face to face. Tired of being disbelieved, Oliver decided to check it out himself. The next morning, at 3:55 a.m., he left the security room and walked to the courtyard, maintaining constant radio contact with Dan, who was monitoring the situation from the monitoring room. When Oliver reached the spot indicated by the camera, he saw nothing. But he felt a strong unease, a feeling of being watched. It was then that he noticed something strange attached to the side of a nearby truck, an old weather-beaten security camera, installed there in a makeshift manner. The camera wasn't part of the current system and shouldn't have been there. Oliver quickly returned to the security room and reviewed all the warehouse's blueprints and technical documents. No additional cameras were recorded. The camera he found wasn't connected to the official system, but it appeared active, with a small red light flashing. He decided to take the camera in for technical analysis the next day, but during the night shift, something even stranger happened. At precisely 4 a.m., all the monitors in the security room began displaying footage from that old camera. Oliver saw grainy footage showing former employees working in the yard, footage dating back at least 15 years, with a specific date highlighted at the bottom, September 17, 2007. While researching that date, Oliver discovered a fatal accident that had occurred on that very day at the warehouse. An employee, James Collier, had been crushed to death between two trucks during a nighttime operation, under unclear circumstances. The incident files had been quickly archived, and few people still remembered the incident. The next night, determined to understand better, Oliver arrived at work early. As he sat in the chair in front of the monitors, he felt an unusual chill in the room. At precisely 4 a.m., the old camera once again transmitted images directly to monitor 17. This time, however, the figure emerging from behind the truck wasn't motionless. Slowly, it turned toward the camera, revealing the clearly visible face of James Collier, his expression blank and his eyes fixed directly on the lens. Oliver felt a sharp chill and realized that behind James was a second figure. With horror, he recognized himself, standing motionless in the background, dressed in the clothes he was wearing at that very moment. Terrified, Oliver stood up quickly, knocking over his chair. The monitors returned to normal instantly. But when he looked back out the window at the royal courtyard, he could clearly see a silhouette standing behind the truck, staring directly at the security room window. Oliver resigned immediately the next morning. Internal investigations never revealed any anomalies in the camera system. The old camera, when analyzed, proved to be empty, with no recent recordings or transmissions. But even after leaving the company, Oliver continued to receive short video files in his personal email, always with the same title, Monitor 17 to 4 a.m. In each video, James Collier was present. In each video, Oliver was a little closer to him. No one else wanted to take the night shift as a camera operator at Redcliffe Logistics. But periodically, the system records motion detected on Monitor 17 at exactly 4 a.m. Even without an operator, even without an official record, someone always remains there, watching through the lens, patiently waiting for the next employee to take over. And so we come to the end of our 7 scary stories involving people who worked during the early hours of the morning. Which one resonated with you the most? Will any of them make you look twice before accepting a night shift? Tell us in the comments which story made you most tense or reminded you of a situation you've experienced. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps the channel grow, and if you're not subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe now and activate the bell.